Namaste, everyone. Welcome to this conversation with Vyasar Ganesan from Indian Matchmaking with Hindu Students Council. My name is Harsh Agrawal. I'm the Vice President of Events for HSC, and we're going to get right to it. So today we have Vyasar, like I had mentioned, from Netflix's show Indian Matchmaking. Growing up, he attended the largest Hindu temple and ashram complex in North America, Radha Madhav Dham, and he's been a practicing Hindu his whole life. So, Vyasar, I'll give you a chance to say a few words before we get started.
It's really great to be a part of this. It's very exciting because when I was in college, I didn't have a Hindu Students Council. I went to a very small liberal arts college in Northwest Pennsylvania, and there were 5 other Indian people who were there, none of whom wanted to start a Hindu Students Council with me. I was very involved in temple affairs from when I was a kid, so it was really hard and sad to not have that same involvement in college, especially going on to grad school too. So I'm really happy and grateful that you guys exist and that your organization is doing such great work and has the reach that it has, and to see it so widespread. It really truly is heartwarming to see, because having that kind of faith community for me when I was, in college would have been exceptionally helpful, especially in high school too, because, I spent so much of my time in high school in a separate world than my temple community. There were lots of kids at both, but it was just different environments, different worlds. Like the world of high school is often very different than the world of the temple and the world of Hinduism. But I'm just really grateful to be here. I'm excited for your questions. That's what I'm probably most excited about. And let's get to it.
Okay, awesome. So the way that we're going to do this, if you're following along and watching, feel free to leave questions in wherever you're following, whether it's YouTube or Facebook. And towards the end, if there's a question that's super relevant to what we're talking about, I might kind of slip that in. But otherwise, we have a few questions we're going to ask, and then from there, we'll take questions from the audience. So the first one, this is kind of a broader question. In your experience, what does it mean to be a Hindu?
It's a great question. So for me personally, religion means nothing if it doesn't mean anything to you on the personal level. So at the very core, Hinduism is about creating a personal relationship with God. That it's not about groupthink or societal expectations or acting out a performative version of Hinduism. It's about creating a personal relationship and a personal understanding of what your faith and what your belief is. It's really easy in this day and age to just say, oh, I'm spiritual, not religious, and leave it at that. Or like, oh, I'm agnostic, I'm going to leave it at that, and not actually reflect and take the time to think about what that means or what else is out there, or like sit with the question of what a higher power is. Rather than coming up with a more complicated answer of, I don't know what I believe, it's very easy to jump to those other things because people don't question you at that point. So for me, when I think about what Hinduism means to me, when I think about it today, it really is like creating a personal relationship with God and like actively spending the time, whether that's meditating, chanting, celebrating festivals, observing holidays, whatever, trying to be conscious and intentional about that relationship and how this celebration is also a celebration of that relationship.
Awesome. And actually, alongside that, I think a great question from the audience. Do you have any tips, or what tips might you have in terms of embracing, a Hindu identity, kind of speaking to what you said just now about people kind of, saying that they're spiritual but not religious or that kind of thing? Like, how do you stay Hindu in the face of that?
That's a really good question. Organized religion has come under fire, right? And not, I don't want to say for bad reason or for good reason, but for the reasons that are the world that we live in. So having a label in general makes things trickier, right? Because if you can label it, you can attack it. If the thing that you love and cherish has a name, has an identity, has a body, has an organization, has a structure, then it can be broken down. It can be demeaned. It can be ridiculed. It can be mocked. And so it creates a sensitivity there. Whereas spiritualism and agnosticism creates a layer of vagueness that protects them and shields them. The way I say you embrace that identity, you embrace it is the same way you embrace vulnerability. You have to be willing to risk getting hurt a little if it means that you can grow and experience something greater and beyond yourself. You also have to be willing to embrace that part of yourself and understand, that's how you become whole in some ways. That if it really is important to you and you see it as a part of yourself, you don't want to be divided. What's the saying? A house divided cannot stand. The same thing goes for a person. You can't be divided against yourself in that way. For a long time in my late 20s, I've been struggling with this notion of my Hindu self, my religious self, as a side of myself that I haven't been nourishing or growing as much as I would have liked. And I'm hoping that this year I get to do that more. There was that Jordan Peele movie, Us, that I think about a lot. The doppelgangers, the notion that we all have a shadow self out there somewhere that is making us incomplete in some way without the inclusion or use of that shadow self, like being forced to confront that shadow self. For me, my shadow self, my doppelganger, is my religious identity, is my Hindu identity. And it's something that I struggle with, and it's something that I care about a great deal, but it's also something that is difficult at times and is not the easiest thing to acknowledge or let into the room. The best thing I could say is don't expect it to be easy. Don't expect it to be enjoyable, but expect it to be work worth doing. That at the end of the day, not doing it is going to cost you a lot more in the long run than doing it now.
Definitely.
Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah. And I think actually kind of great segue into the next question that we had, speaking to your experience as a Hindu, like especially later on, but also while you were in college. Could you speak to your experience as a Hindu in college? You mentioned it a little at the beginning as well. It'd be great to hear more.
Yeah. So I'll give you some background of where I was coming from before I got to college. So I attended this very large Hindu temple and ashram complex, Radha Madhav. I grew up there, basically. I would run family camps there in the summer and the winter. I would perform in leelas, and all of a sudden I got to college, and I was surrounded by Indian people. I was surrounded by Indian teenagers, especially. And when I got to college, all of that went away. There were no other Hindus there. The few Indians who were there didn't want to do anything with religion. It was my first time being in an environment with Indian people who did not want to be around other Indians. They wanted to be the only Indian, the only Hindu in the room. And that was really tricky for me to navigate. That was the first time I'd felt that way. So it became a part of my identity that I would try to chase after, but felt that I kept getting rejected. Ironically, the people who accepted me the most were the crunchy granola hippie white people at that college, right? The ones who were looking for Eastern wisdom, the ones who were looking for something beyond what the Bible had taught them. So I did find like somewhat of a niche with them and being able to talk and share that Hindu experience. But as the years went on, it became very clear that they were looking for the tourist version of it. And I was their tourist visa into that world. And that became problematic too, for sure, as far as friendships go. I will say our spiritual and religious life organization on campus was very supportive. And by senior year, we'd actually built a fully functioning meditation and spiritual life house with separate prayer rooms for different faiths. There was a Buddhist meditation room. There was a Muslim prayer room. There was a Hindu meditation room. Like, we built all these really nice rooms there for people of different faiths to feel like they had a space on campus to come and celebrate their faith or meditate or whatever. There was a fully functioning kitchen for them to prepare meals if they needed to. There were multiple bathrooms. It was a really, really nice building to be able to be a part of building that space and getting to contribute, okay, like this picture, and like getting to set a budget for murtis and palis and diyas and ghee, and like getting to order all of that for the space. Even if I didn't get to use it for, more than a year, knowing that it's still there and knowing that it's part of the campus now as a resource, it feels really nice to have left that behind.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I know that's something that we're trying to do across the board with several other chapters and across universities as well. So another question, kind of speaking to this base that you have with Hinduism for yourself, who are what are some inspirational people or stories in your life that have fortified your faith in Hinduism and Hindu Dharma?
Yeah, that's a great question. I look to Swami Vivekananda's example a lot. He's just a classic Hindu figure for many of us, especially being that many of us are students. Vivekananda like shows up as a teacher, as someone who is here to provide instruction and like make things digestible and easily accessible. I think a lot about various Jagadgurus. I think one of my favorite stories is the story of Valmiki, the composer of the Ramayana, who, when Valmiki first started out, he wasn't a saint. He was a murderer. Like, he was a bad dude. He couldn't even say the word Ram. He had to say Mara. And that's one of my favorite stories in Hinduism, is that by saying Mara, 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 he ended up saying Ram, 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 because the two ran into each other. And that's how he got to where he was. And I think about that a lot, that none of us is beyond redemption. None of us is beyond repair. None of us is beyond the reach of Hinduism. That like it's just about finding what works for us. That's what makes Hinduism, I think, such a powerful faith in that way, is that at its core, if you boil down every single scripture, if you take away all the trappings of North Indian celebration, South Indian celebration, Diwali versus Deepavali or whatever, you boil it down to what it is at its core. It is a set of three principles that if any religion follows these three principles, they're on the right path. It's the belief in a single unified divine power called God or whatever you want to call it. It's the belief in a basic set of moral principles that accompanies that power, that accompanies the way in which you want to live, and a system of karma or dharma, a sense of duty and role in the world, and action and consequence, that the actions that we have in this life have a consequence in our next life. Applying those three principles to any religion, Hinduism says, and you have another version of Hinduism. It's all correct. Like, the whole notion of Hinduism is that every religion is on the same footing as long as they have these three principles, and as long as they encourage their followers to act within those beliefs. And it's been really inspirational or inspiring to think that, like, yeah, all of my friends are secretly Hindu. Doesn't matter. It's great. So it's also great because it lets me, I feel really happy when I get to read or like review other writings from other world religions, because I look for Hinduism within them. I look for those basic principles that I was taught, and I find them there, and I feel connected. Like, I don't feel that Christians want to convert me because we believe the same thing. There's no difference. In fact, I actually have a lot in common with a lot of my Catholic friends, and I consistently surprise them over and over again when they find out that they're like, yeah, the Holy Spirit, like the Holy Trinity, it's the same thing with Hinduism. Many faces, one God, right? It doesn't matter what you call it; it's all God in the end. So I find a lot of my inspiration just from the world that I see, the figures that I see moving through it in that way.
That's awesome. I think it's actually really interesting, also kind of going back to the conversation you just mentioned about Valmiki and his story. I remember when I was watching the show, one of the only times that I've really seen mention of like even something remotely like Hindu to an extent was when you talked about your name. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with the show, do you want to just really quick, before we get into those questions about the show, kind of what you said about your name, where it comes from, like,
yeah,
why? Yeah,
I can definitely do that. So I was mentioning my name is Vyasar, which many of you have keenly noted is from Ved Vyas. Ved Vyas is the generator saint in Hinduism. Which means he is the saint who penned all of the scriptures for Hinduism. So the Vedas, the Bhagavatam, the Gita, like he's the generator for all the scriptures. So my father named me after Ved Vyas. Vyasar is there's a South Indian chant, a Tamil chant, that uses Vyasar instead of Vyas, because according to my dad, it's the formal way to pronounce Ved Vyas. His name is Vyasara. I am not the only Vyasar in the world. Funnily enough, there are plenty more. I just haven't met one in real life yet, but fingers crossed, one day I will. But yeah, that was the story I must have told on my show. And it's interesting, going back to storytelling, because apparently this is going to turn into Hindu story time with Vyasar very quickly. So my last name is Ganesan, which again, for those of you who are paying attention, comes from Ganesh as well. And Ved Vyas and Ganesh have a very interesting story together that's actually about how the Hindu scriptures are written. So Vyas is getting ready to write these scriptures. He's got them all in his mind. He's the saint. He knows everything. So but he doesn't want to do the work himself. He wants to dictate. He doesn't have the time. He's not a fast writer. So he goes to Ganesh, who he knows can get the job done. And he says, hey, Ganesh, I need a favor to ask. Can you write these scriptures for me? I'm going to recite them. You'll take notes. Now, those of you who know any story involving Ganesha know that he's a little tricky sometimes. He likes to play pranks and make jokes, and he's kind of crafty sometimes. So Ganesh says, okay, I will write for as long as you can speak. Basically, the minute you stop speaking is the minute I stop writing. So you have to speak continuously nonstop. Now, for any of you who've read any of the Vedas or any of the scriptures, you know that they're very long, and you cannot just spit them out in one breath. So Vyas thinks for a second. He says, okay, deal, but I also have a condition. You cannot write anything down until you have fully understood its meaning. And Ganesh realized, okay, that's what we're doing. So basically, anytime Vyas needed like a bathroom break or to grab a snack or take a nap, he would just throw out a really confusing, puzzling line that Ganesh had to sort of decipher before he could actually write it down. That's why if you look at the scriptures, actually some of them are written in that meter, in that rhyming frame, but there's also one line at the end sometimes or in certain spots that you'll see don't really oh, that's very cryptic, or that's a very like convoluted metaphor or analogy that doesn't translate well. So I think about that story a lot, given that those are two parts of my name. And I think also too, it's just an amazing story of just showing that like, yeah, this is where our scriptures come from. There's this agreement of knowledge that it's not enough to just recite scripture. It's not enough to just write it down and read it. You have to understand it. You have to be able to create comprehension and talk about it and pore over it and argue about it. And that's what deepens faith at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of going alongside that, to your experience with the show. So, you were on Indian Matchmaking. How has Indian Matchmaking, if at all, shaped your perspective on relationships within like Hindu versus Western culture? It's a loaded question, I know, but
yeah, that's a super loaded question. It's funny. There's so much footage from the show that they didn't use. One of the things that they filmed when Seema Taparia from Mumbai came into my house and we sat down and we had a chat. We spent an hour just talking about religion. One of the first questions she had was about my name, and so we were talking about that, and you saw a little bit of that footage. But we had a whole conversation about Hinduism and religion and relationships and everything, and it was incredible. We had this huge spanning conversation that I really, really hope that gets used at some point, because there's some great lines. There's some great dialogue in that conversation. But one of the things I remember we talked about was she was very keen on asking, you're a very smart person, you're a very well-educated person, especially when it comes to Hindu scripture and Hindu living in life. Would you want your partner to be as well-educated? Do you want your partner to have the same passion for Hinduism as you do? And what ultimately came down to it for me, what I decided was that it doesn't matter if they know every single ritual or every single shloka. I don't know every single ritual or shloka. Who's got time for that? What it matters is that they have an appreciation for it. They don't have to necessarily celebrate every single holiday, but they at least need to be able to showcase a level of appreciation beyond, oh, I think it's really cool that you put a red dot on your forehead or you play with color. That there needs to be a level of appreciation and understanding beyond that. Like, for lack of a better word, they need to be able to see Hinduism in its critical context and its significance. For me, I think that's still important, that whoever I'm with, there needs to be a sense of value added from Hinduism. Because if there's not, what are we like? I mean, Hinduism is too vast of a thing to just ignore. It is every single Indian American person's life, I think, at some point or another has been impacted by Hindu culture, Hindu customs, Hindu beliefs, Hindu upbringing in some way. That to ignore it, or to say that it has no value, or to say that it's not worth thinking about, strikes me as a little fatuous and not very self-aware. So I really think that it has to be a conversation you have with any partner. But for me specifically, it's something that I do think about a lot, and that's something that it's not about my kids being raised Hindu. It's not about observing this holiday or doing this yajna or doing this ritual or when we buy a house or whatever, doing the havan for the house. It's about mutual understanding and respect, and being able to use Hinduism as a way to create that, and also creating mutual understanding and respect through that.
Of course, and that's definitely really important. I think one question that we have also kind of surrounding the same topic, you mentioned one incident from Simran, who's one of our chapter leaders. We have this question: what's your favorite moment from Indian matchmaking, either one that was seen on TV or from behind the scenes?
Oh, man. So there's lots of shots of me at the school that I teach at and work at. There's lots of scenes of me walking in the hallways, talking to students, hanging out in my office, things like that. One of the things that we did was, like, after the filming, they wanted to get some more establishing shots of me walking around and just doing things. So they put me on this trolley, basically, and pushed it around the school with a camera on it. So it creates one of those effects where it looks like I'm standing still, but the hallways are moving around me. It looks really cool. But they were pushing it forwards and pushing it backwards down one hallway, and I wasn't paying attention. I was just doing what they were telling me to do. And at one point, I'm a pretty tall dude, so I'm already pretty high up on the trolley, close to the ceiling. And there's an exit sign that's coming from behind me that just clocks me in the back of the head. And they caught it in slow motion, and it's beautiful. It's like watching a skateboarding prank fail or something, but with my face in front of it. Oh, it's priceless. And I'm really sad it didn't make the cut. But what else am I sad about? That's a more silly thing. Oh, there was a D&D game. Like they filmed me playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friends and never used it. And actually, that one we had a whole conversation about religion and faith in that D&D session too. That didn't get used as well. So, what are you gonna do? Production value's got their own needs.
Yeah, their own story. Do you feel like there was anything that was done on the show? Like, how do you feel kind of coming after the show? I know you've spoken a bunch and written a bunch as well afterwards, but kind of for our audience here, your experience on the show itself, like, did it feel like there was almost some kind of thing they were pushing, or like, was there any kind of bias or something that maybe you felt was unfair, or you were, rather than these small moments that, was there anything, like, do you think that was bigger that maybe you felt would have been important to include?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of stuff that they could have included that they chose not to. There's plenty of stuff that they could have highlighted that they chose not to highlight. Rupam is a doctor, and they didn't talk about that at all in the show. I have a degree from Columbia in creative writing, not talked about in the show at all. Not that I care about that or want that to be what's highlighted, but like just lots of little things and decisions like that. I think it would have been neat to see more discussion around Hinduism or more discussion around faith as a topic matter, because there's plenty of conversations about things that are related to it, right? Things like drinking or not drinking, things like vegetarian or non-vegetarian, things like which part of India you're from. I mean, there's a lot of conversation about things that are related to that. There's conversations about face readers and astrologers and like specific dates that are related to what you can get married and the calendars and things like that, and star charts and things that are tangentially related to Hinduism, but on a very surface level. Like, these are easily accessible things for people to say, like, oh yeah, that's Hinduism, rather than like a more nuanced understanding. So it would have been cool to see space for that made. It would have been cool to see or try to allow for more of that nuance or that complexity to come through. Because how Hinduism is observed in a Guyanese family is very different than it is in a South Indian family, which is very different than it's observed in a family that lives in Mumbai. It's very tricky to navigate that space, but it's an important space to navigate. Now, granted, the things that I'm asking for will have made the show 3 times longer, but I mean, look, the show is still very popular. Like, clearly we did, like, it was doing fine as it was. You could add a little bit more and no one would have complained. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's definitely something that I had noticed as well, as far as, all of these things that, like you said, are tangentially related, but there wasn't really any reference to, like, if you're already having conversations about religion and about kind of how you see religion, and obviously this is a conversation you would want to have with someone that you're talking about, you spending the rest of your life with, it becomes an important factor. And it definitely felt like something, if that conversation's already happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, if anyone is watching this right now who's in a relationship with someone and they haven't had this conversation about faith, it's an important one to have. Whether you have faith or not, whether that's something that you are struggling with actively or not, take the time with your partner to sit down and have a conversation about, look, I want to get to know you from this perspective. This is not something that I've ever thought about before, and I want to think about it with you. Like making that clear that's important to you and them in that space, you know? Don't force it. Don't like push it to the point where it's like all you talk about, but make it known that you are willing to create the space for this, that you are acknowledge that there is room for that conversation to be had. Yeah.
Awesome. So as far as Indian matchmaking, one more question. This one comes from Karan, one of the presidents of the USF chapter, also instrumental in hosting this today with Simran from earlier. So her question is, how did you end up on the cast of Indian Matchmaking?
That's a great question. So 2018, I'm in a work meeting in an office in downtown Austin, and I get a text from a friend. And I know you're not supposed to be looking at your phone during work meetings, but I snuck a quick peek, and it says, hey, I'm in Hollywood, and I just saw this casting poster. I think you'd be great for it. So I look at the picture of this poster, and it just says, seeking South Asian singles. And I don't see a Netflix logo or any movie logo, and I think, this is spam. This is 100% spam. I turn off my phone thinking my poor friend got hacked. And I don't look at my phone for the rest of the meeting, even though it goes off a few more times. So the meeting ends, and I look at my phone, and I've got 6 messages from people all over the world on WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, my regular text message saying, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, all with the same flyer. And I'm like, okay, it's probably unlikely that all 6 of these people got hacked at the same time. So let me see what they're saying. And then I see the Netflix logo, and then I see the Untitled Indian Matchmaking Project. Then I see like, oh, this is a pretty neat thing. Sure, I'll apply for it, but only to get these people off my back so they don't keep texting me and bothering me. So I apply for it. I have one phone call with the casting agent, and then I don't hear anything for a few months. And then a few months later, I hear from someone, a producer, saying that they want to interview me, and then they want to set up follow-up interviews with my mom and my family. I said, oh, okay, that's weird. Still didn't think I was going to get picked at this point because it's been so many months. It's the end of the year. It's getting into January, February now. And I still have not been hearing a lot from them. And I was thinking, too, there's no way they're going to pick me. I'm too weird. I'm not handsome. I'm loud. No one wants to see me on this show. So finally, February rolls around, and I get a call from the executive producer saying, hey, we're going to be at your house in 1 month. Pick a day, and we're going to be filming. And it was just, that's it. No acceptance letter, no confetti, just here we go. We're going. And in March we started. So that was March of 2019 that we all took off in.
Okay, awesome. How long did it take overall?
So we started filming over spring break in March, and then we wrapped up with me in November, but they had started filming with other people as early as the end of 2018. And they filmed with some people all the way through January of 2020.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And they were doing post-production all through the pandemic, basically.
Gotcha. And the application, kind of the flyer that you mentioned, what year time was that?
That would have been October or September of 2018.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
It's
covering almost a 3-year span now. It's kind of crazy to think.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So kind of, I wanted to take a second to speak to some of the other things that you've done. You know, you're as a someone who works in high school, like as a faculty in high school. I think there was someone who actually had a question along these lines as well. So I want to, also from Kiran. So as someone who works in education, do you have any advice for us who are completing classes online from home? I think this is a really great question from a lot of students.
Yeah, this is a great one. The number one thing I would try to say is try to find space that's just for you, or a dedicated space to do classwork in. I know I'm at home right now. I've been working from home, and one of the things I struggle with is working at the dining table, working on the sofa, or working here in my office. Because when I work here in my office, well, there's a lot of clutter. It's not very clean, but it's my fault. I need to clean it. And it's also not as comfortable as my couch or whatever. It's not. There's no food nearby. But when I work in the dining room or on the living room, the TV is right there. The fridge is right there. There's food right there. There's stuff to do right there. There's plenty of things to distract me and keep me busy. It's also like if my mom is over, if I have family over, it's not a great space to get work done in because there's family distractions all around. For many of you, you may have siblings at home, or you may have pets or visitors from, visiting with family, or mom or someone bothering you, or like, you need to find a space that can be just for schoolwork and try to like maintain that space. Obviously, don't feel like beholden to only sit in that one uncomfortable chair to focus, but try to maintain some regularity with that space. Try to create an environment where this is a serious place to get work done, where I can buckle down, focus, and create space for at least an hour or so at a time to just knock work out and get stuff done. The other thing I would remind you too is as good as it feels to slack off and get nothing done sometimes, one of the things that is proven to release dopamine and serotonin in our brains is checking things off a list. So making lists for yourselves is a great way of staying happy. And it can be as simple as, did I floss today? Right? Did I walk outside for like 5 or 10 minutes? Which granted for some of us in the colder parts of the country, not always great, but it still checks an item off the list. So give yourselves lists to do. Give yourselves things to do, whether they're related to schoolwork or not, because it just makes you feel happy and it helps break the mundane sort of routine online school.
Makes sense. So kind of alongside that, coming back to like the Hindu community and kind of your experience with it, how do you feel about mental health? And I know you've also spoken about mental health in the past. How do you feel about mental health perspectives within the Hindu community? Because that seems like something that can be, expressed more or talked about.
That's a great question. From my experience, it's been tricky. So much of my understanding and experience with Hinduism is doing things for others. I was taught from a very early age that Bhagwan, one of the names for God, translates to he who makes others great. So the idea right from the very beginning, right with the name of God, is one of service, is that we do things not for ourselves, but for others. And my temple definitely follows that pattern as well, is that we try to do as much as we can for others and put others before ourselves and our own needs. And that's really great when you're a selfish teenager and growing up, because it creates like strong moral values and backgrounds and upbringings. But you have to fill your own cup before you can fill someone else's. And I'm saying that now as someone who was 30, but I didn't say that until I turned 30. It was a hard lesson to learn, because there came a point where I would do all the things at the temple or in my faith that would make me happy. That I normally satisfied some internal drive because it made other people happy. And I noticed that it wasn't having the same effect. I wasn't happy. I was getting sadder and more frustrated. And it took a long time to realize that I had very essential needs that I was choosing not to meet. And what it became down to was, if I do these things for others, I make things better and easier for them and I'm able to serve them more. But I begin to sacrifice parts of myself that make it hard to wake up in the morning, that make it hard to get my normal day-to-day stuff done, that make it hard for me to be happy for just normal things for myself. And I became less and less willing to sacrifice and lose those things. One of the easiest things, without going into too much detail, is just time. Waking up early on a Sunday to go cook for people at the temple was one of my most fondest, happiest memories of being a kid at the temple. Going with the family to cook meals on Sundays in the community felt really great. But as I've gotten older, Saturdays are also a time that I like to hang out with friends, maybe stay up a little later than I should, even if it's just watching YouTube videos at home. And enjoying sleeping in is something that I do. I like sleeping in. And sometimes on Sundays, it's nice to sleep in, because if you don't get enough sleep, it just creates cascades of problems, especially as you get older. So yeah, some of this is old man complaining. I'm sorry. But it was also a hard adjustment to make from realizing this is not something I can do every day anymore. This is not something I can consistently maintain. This is something that I have to sacrifice to take care of myself. That yes, I am not taking care of other people, but someone else will always be able to cook on a Sunday. It doesn't have to always be me. I can use this as an opportunity to practice self-care and self-love. And that was a hard lesson to learn that I'm still learning and I'm still trying to grapple with. So I think that we need to create better spaces within Hindu culture to find ways. What are ways that we can use Hinduism to fill our own cups, to create a sense of self-worth, self-actualization, rather than say we can just use Hinduism to do good for others. We should also be trying to use it to do good for ourselves too.
Sure. That's great advice. I think alongside that also, kind of given that, you're a counselor, I remember when we were speaking earlier, you mentioned that you end up kind of becoming a counselor for a lot of the Indians and other South Asians at in the high school campus that you work at. So are there any issues that come up as far as mental health goes? Have you seen things, and what have you done, or are there any tips that you would give to those kinds of students who are out there right now?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things I'm happiest about the school I work with, is that I get to work with South Asian students. I get to work with Hindu students. I get to see them every day and just help them with their lives and help them navigate the space that is being Asian American and Hindu American. And it's a tricky space to be in for a lot of them. One thing I see over and over again is this constant searching for footing, meaning that they're trying to figure out where they stand constantly, whether they need to be assimilating right now or they need to be Indian right now, whether they need to fit in or stand out. Especially because we're talking more and more about inclusion and diversity now in schools, as we're talking more and more about giving everyone space at the table. Some people aren't comfortable with being in the spotlight like that, and that's the crazy thing, right? Even the notion of having just a fair share, of having a space table, feeling welcome, is too much of a spotlight for some people, because they have so much anxiety about being different that their fear of rejection trumps their desire for acceptance. So the biggest advice I can tell them is that it doesn't have to be big picture capital A acceptance and inclusion all the time. Find small ways to be yourself around people that you trust. Give yourself challenges that are more manageable and more reasonable. It's the same advice I give to people who want to have better relationships with their parents. There's so many Asian Americans out there who have really fraught relationships with their parents because they're like, I want to be able to tell my parents that I am this way, or that I'm gay, or that I don't like Hinduism, or that I want to eat meat, or that I do these things, but I can't communicate who I am honestly with them. And I feel awful about lying to them all the time, but I don't have a better way to be. And it's the same thing with this. It's that I don't want to live a lie all the time, but I don't know how to be honest all the time. And it's the same thing. Who said you have to do it all the time? Find a more reasonable way to let yourself be honest or open to yourself in small ways. Building blocks, build up to where you want to be. Start small, start manageable. Give yourself little things that you do. Find people who you trust to see you and show them who you are. And if they reject you, yeah, that's going to be painful, but it's not going to be as painful as a larger group or in a larger setting, or with people you don't know and don't trust. And work hard at that. That's always something that's worth doing.
Sure. So along those lines, when you work and when you're teaching and being this kind of model for these students and teaching them, do you see yourself using, like you mentioned that you've used to run and help teach at family camps and things at the Radha Madhav Dham. Do you see yourself using things that you learned from that, or experiences from there that are along those Hindu practices and beliefs, even along the 3 tenets that you were talking about earlier?
Harsh, I'll tell you, it's funny. When I was at the camps, camp counselor is a very loose term. I did very little actual counseling. I was very snotty as a high school student and a college student when it came to camp, because I resented the notion of being counselors. I'm here to run the camp and make sure you all have a great time and resolve problems and make sure everyone shows up on time. If you're having difficulties and problems, I talk to your friends. I am not in the position to help you, because helping you takes up too much time. I was such just an absolute jerk about that like that. But I think the thing it taught me more than anything else is, and what I use from that in my work, is just a sense of approachability. Because even if I wasn't helping them people, or like I didn't have the mentality of helping them, I still projected some aura of approachability that I still don't understand, but I've learned that people do see me as approachable. That there are students who I regularly interact with now who when they started interacting with me, I had no idea who they were. They came to me because they needed help. And now I'm in a position where I just help students, and it's great. And I'm really grateful that I have that opportunity. I look back at those years at the Family Camp with regret, because I could have been more, I could have helped more, I could have worked harder to be more supportive for them. But again, it comes down to you have to fill your cup before you can fill others. And whoever I was then, I was not in a position to help them in the way that they needed. I just wasn't. But I'm grateful that I had the opportunity, and I'm grateful that I get to pay it forward now.
Sure, of course. So do you see kind of, so if it's not from like your experience back then, do you see that there's anything like when you mentor these students now that you can draw from your personal like Hindu upbringing, background, that kind of stuff?
I didn't have me growing up. I didn't have an older Hindu person out in the world who wasn't a direct relative. I think that's something I'm super grateful that these kids have, is that even if I'm no saint, but I'm someone who they can look to as an example for a young person, a young adult in the Hindu world, and that also lives in the real world. That's not a direct relative. That's not someone their parents are making them spend time with. That they can look to and say, yeah, there is a life after high school. It does get better. There is a world out there that I get to enjoy and experience. And just being able to model that to them, getting to model everyday average Hindu American life is important to me. And I'm grateful that I get to do that. Because I remember growing up, I didn't have that. I had a lot of Indian friends who were my age, and I had a lot of friends who in high school who were Indian and Hindu. And I remember really enjoying having that peer group, but I also remember it not being enough. Because once it ended, once I was in college, and once I lost that, I had nothing else to model after. You know, I had no other behaviors to build on. I had nothing else to create. No memories beyond that.
Okay, awesome. So, I mean, I think I've asked a lot of questions about this, but kind of probably more broad in a broader sense. If there was one piece of advice, I'm sure you get asked this all the time as well. If there was one piece of advice that you could give for high school students or college students, we have chapters in both, or both, if the advice that you would say would be different for both. What would it be, and kind of where is it coming from?
Yeah, I think it's not the same for both. I'll tell you that right away. Okay. For high school students, be a kid for as long as possible. And what I mean is, don't let the pressure that you feel to grow up too quickly determine what you spend your summers doing. I know that a lot of us have parents out there who push us to get that internship, take that extra exam, take that extra AP course, push and push and push and push, because don't waste your time. There's this whole notion of you shouldn't be wasting your time. Doing something that you enjoy is never wasting your time. And being able to preserve that and being able to do those things that you enjoy when you were young, it's something that is incredibly valuable and should not be taken for granted. And it should not be treated, frankly, as a waste of time. Be willing to chase after the passions that are important to you. Be willing to spend your time doing things that make you happy, not just doing things that, you know, are going to look impressive on a resume when you apply for college. In fact, I would say don't even think about college until junior year, as much as you can. Put it off for as long as possible until junior year. Give yourself freshman year and sophomore year of high school to just be a kid. Chase after the things that you want to chase after, you know, but don't get so stressed that you stop seeing the present. Sorry, don't get so stressed about the future that you stop seeing the present, is what I would say for high school kids. For college students, it's different for a couple of reasons. Number one, you're older. Slightly older, but older. Number two, you're paying to be there, which is adds a very different level of investment there. And number three, you're starting to ask yourself harder questions. who am I and what do I want? I think the biggest thing is not feeling complacent. Because I declared this finance major, I am stuck in this. Because I have always said I'm going to be an accountant, I'm going to be an accountant. Because I see a lot of Indians in computer science, I should feel that I need to be in computer science. Ask yourself, who am I and what do I want? And let that guide you, not restrict you. I think that's the biggest piece of advice I can give, is just, because I'll tell you from my experience, I went to grad school in Columbia for my creative writing, for an MFA in creative writing. And there were a lot of Indians in my program, but there was a lot of Indians in Columbia in general. And I remember going to parties and hanging out with people and seeing other Indians talking about being in the business school, being in the medical program, being in the science engineering department, even in the social work program. And when they saw me tell them that I was in the creative writing program, sort of cocked their heads to one side and said, "Oh," and I could tell it was like I was like a scientific curiosity, like, "Oh, he's different. He's not like us." And what it came down to, because I was always, "Why did you choose that? Didn't you get any pushback from your parents? Like, how could they let you do such a thing with your life?" And I said, "I don't see it as me wasting my life. I get to spend every single day reading and writing the things that I love most in the world. I read on average 3 to 5 books a week, and on average wrote 40 to 60 pages a week. It's not like I'm not doing work, I'm spending a lot of time doing those things. It's work that I actually like doing, that's worth doing to me, and it's something I care about." How many of these other people can say the same? It's not even about that part. It's about just knowing that makes me happy. That's my definition for that. And because I had that, I felt really empowered and really grateful to be there. And yeah, it might have made me a little bit of a snotty brat in grad school for sure. Like, I'm different. I'm not like them. When there's like 10 other Indians in the creative writing program at Columbia who are all thinking the same thing. But it was still important for me in that environment, in that collegiate environment, to feel that it literally does not matter what every other Indian is doing right now. It matters what I am doing and how that fulfills my definition of happiness and success for myself.
Right. Awesome pieces of advice. So I think we have about 10 minutes left. So we'll take questions. Again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. There's this one question that came from Arnav Kejriwal, the president of HSC, a little bit ago, kind of speaking to your earlier experience with Radha Madhav Dham. Does the ashram help the community, in the Hindu community in Austin, build a broader Hindu identity beyond just the basic festivals? He notices most of his friends and colleagues only go to the mandir during Diwali, Holi, or other major events.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I would recommend, like, the family camps are always really fun. The sadhana shivirs, the devotional intensives, they're marketed definitely to an older crowd because they're devotional intensives, so you can expect lots of chanting and quiet time. But there is a youth component as well, the family camp, that's very well done and well organized. And I can't recommend that or encourage that enough. The classes there are designed and have a working curriculum we've been working on for more than a decade at this point, more than 2 decades almost now. So that one is a really great way for the community to get connected and involved, because then the community can sort of bring them there. Now, granted, that's just another 2 major events throughout the year, right? Like, that's Holi, Diwali, family camp winter, family camp summer. So yeah, that's not that much more. Right now, the temple is kind of in a weird place administratively. They're trying to figure out where to branch into next with that outreach specifically. What I can say is that Shiksha, our Sunday school program, that's something that happens every single Sunday, and they're always looking for more teachers. So if you're interested in getting involved, think about a subject that you'd want to teach. And it's not just Hindu classical music, scriptures, and dholak, and harmonium. There's a guy who teaches coding there. There's a person who's teaching intro to accounting, and it's not just middle school kids and high school kids. There's adults and college students who are taking some classes there too. So that's a really great way to create community outreach, because it's communities bringing their kids and their families on Sundays for those classes. So you're not there necessarily for services all the time every Sunday, going into the prayer hall and sitting for an hour and chanting. You're going to these Sunday school classes and helping build a larger Hindu community of learning, which I think is really valuable and cannot be underestimated how important that is. With regards to high schools and creating outreach there, I think that finding a way for HSCs to partner up and create that organization and that system within the temple and within schools is really important, that there is a necessary bridge there that hasn't been developed. I can tell you right now, it's one of my biggest criticisms of the temple is that they don't do enough work like that. And I can tell you exactly why. There are 60 people who live and work at the temple full time, and almost all of them are over the age of 60 at this point. They've been out of high school for a good long while. To that end as well, that's not their number one priority. Most of them are more concerned with keeping the lights on at the temple. The pandemic has been really, really hard for the temple. One of the things that the temple is most famous for is having lots of overnight accommodations. There are a wide variety of rooms that you can spend the night at, and you can book a stay for yourself and your family to go explore all 200 acres of the grounds. We haven't had any reservations this year, really. The temple has had very, very few, and it's made it really hard because they generate so much income off of that. There's a wedding hall at the temple that hasn't been rented out in a long time. Mm-hmm. That they've lost a lot of income there. So a lot of the concern of the temple right now is how do we keep the doors open and the lights on, not how do we create outreach with schools. It's something that desperately needs to happen. I will say that if and when it does happen, there's a lot of barriers and obstacles in their way. Number one, separation of church and state, right? When it's convenient, a lot of organizations, especially bureaucratic ones, like to throw that around as a word. But there are opportunities for cultural enrichment, not faith indoctrination, that need to be focused on. And it's certainly an opportunity that is worth exploring. So if you know anybody who wants to take the initiative to create that bridge, by all means, send them to the temple, create that bridge. We need it. We desperately need it.
Awesome. And actually, I think along those lines, Arnav had this follow-up question also just with yourself. And I think we had discussed this as well a little bit earlier. HSC has chapters in high school as well. Vyasar, how do you suggest we better reach Hindu students, both, I would say, at the high school level in general, but also, in the US, Texas, and at your high school?
I think one thing that's really key is just making the marketing approachable. Call them workshops, that we are today we are having a Hindu workshop specifically focused on Hindu sciences or Vedic sciences. Today, the topic of our discussion is Ayurveda. Today, we're having a yoga workshop, not to just sit and do yoga for an hour, but to actually talk about what yoga means from a Hindu scriptural perspective, from a Hindu religious perspective. I think also another thing that's key is not treating high school students like they know nothing. Create the space for them to share what they know and express their knowledge. Working harder to create a sense of approachability, a degree of this is a welcome space for you to be in, to express whether you have ignorance to express or knowledge to express who you are, and not to necessarily feel validated, but to come away with a greater sense of understanding and a greater sense of community. Another thing I would say that would be important is making it clear that they are part of something larger, that this is not just a one-off organization that when the senior who's running this graduates, this club is going to dissolve. Making it clear that this is a living, breathing organization that we want to create investment in, that we want to create a community around, that we want to maintain for years and years to come. Giving the students something excited around that as well. Last thing I'll say on this, because I know there's other questions we want to get to, you have a very unique difficulty in high schools where there's not a lot of Indian students and a lot of Hindu students who, several Indian students who will want to create this chapter, this organization, but they don't see a lot of other Hindu students there at their high school, and they don't want to be at a meeting with the same 5 kids every single day. That it becomes really tricky when you're looking at a lot of these high schools that are smaller or have smaller populations of Hindu students and trying to create it there. You don't want to ignore them, but at the same time, you also want to focus resources and assets in places where it'll have the most impact. The easiest thing I would say is everything is virtual right now, create a virtual resource bank for those students. Create virtual opportunities for those students that they can download and use to, whether it's for self-study or individual study, maybe have floating chapters of the HSC Have maybe larger organizations that do open meetings or open workshops where anyone from across the United States can jump on a Zoom call or whatever and sit with them and talk about these things and express, I only have 5 other Indians at my school, help, where they can feel outreach and a sense of community that way.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, so I think we're just about running out of time. I also don't think there's any outstanding super questions. So yeah, so with that, I think we'll call it here. Thank you so much for coming on to our platform and speaking with us today, and all of our students and everyone who watches this in the future, past just today's event. We'll hopefully be bringing you back at some point also for other discussions and our weekly discussions. I had mentioned to you before that we have kind of discussions in a more private setting for everyone to kind of interact with each other and really talk, kind of similar to what you were saying, like an open Zoom meeting. So look out for that if you're interested and sign up for those. Thank you again, Vyasar. It was great to have you on and great discussion.
Thanks for having me, guys. It was a real pleasure. Take care.
Namaste, everyone.